Chapter 7. I thought I saw Elizabeth in the bloom of health walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. Elizabeth departed Lake Como as soon as transport could be arranged, bringing Sophie and William with her. In hopes of overtaking Henry, she even hired a carriage in Leno to speed their way. Alas, their journey to Ingolstadt was affected by the stormiest weather she'd ever witnessed, thunderstorms, hail, and floods. But Elizabeth refused to be deterred. Though it was already night by the time they arrived in Ingolstadt, she resolved to go to Victor after settling Sophie and William at the coaching inn. "Mademoiselle, shouldn't you wait until morning?" Sophie pressed, clutching a sleeping William in her lap. "It's still raining. You need rest, food. It's dark out. I must find Victor." With luck, she'd arrive before Henry. He'd probably been delayed as much as she'd been by the weather. Oh, she'd be welcoming to him, profuse in her gratitude. But she'd make it clear Henry's help was not required, that she still loved Victor and that he was her responsibility, not Henry's. Henry might love her, but his love would have to be that of a brother, not a lover. She'd will herself to no longer desire him. And so Elizabeth wrapped her still damp cloak about her travel-fatigued body and rushed into the streets of Ingolstadt, where the night air hung as though clouds had descended over the city like a bell jar. She clutched a small map in one hand and Victor's address in her other, though there was scant light to examine either. The streets were narrow, medieval, winding, not unlike those in the oldest part of Geneva. She passed the university walls, recognizing a pale steeple and clock tower. It began to chime 11. She must be close. Victor's rooms were just outside the university walls. Wasn't that what her uncle had said? By then, the rain had slowed enough that Elizabeth could make out the hush of wind brushing against tree branches, the drip of water from eaves, the bang of a loose shutter. She hurried on. Beneath her feet, cobblestones glittered with moisture. She avoided the occasional puddle. Her breath sounded heavy with fear, though she didn't feel such. It was more of a disquietude rising through her blood, a disturbance she needed to rectify. How dark Ingolstadt was, how quiet. It seemed as though all the world was slumbering, including Victor. She'd never been out alone so late. Did this make her brave, or a fool? Perhaps Sophie was right. She should have waited until morning. Yet her need to see him, to make amends, wouldn't allow her to turn back. Several steps later, she sensed someone behind her. A shuffling footfall, a low moan. Though she was seized with the urge to run, Elizabeth glanced over her shoulder. Again her breath sounded rough. "Hello?" she called. No answer but the hiss of wind, the weight of moisture. She squinted. She made out in the fog what appeared to be the silhouette of a lurching form about 8 feet tall standing beside a wall built of stone. Dark hair, long arms. Whoever or whatever it was, the figure was still, solitary, thick of form, too massive to be human. She pulled down her hood to see better. Luckily, the rain had slowed enough that the sky had cleared. A tree. She'd imagined someone. What she thought to be arms were limbs, fingers the gnarl of branches. Still, her flesh prickled beneath her stays like a cold hand on her spine. She stepped away, feet plunging into icy water. She'd been too distracted to avoid a puddle. She looked down. In the puddle lay a small, dun-hued rabbit, its glassy eyes unnaturally wide. How fragile it appeared, so precious. Elizabeth had the sense its heart had ceased mid-beat, as though it had been startled from life. Her emotions clotted with protectiveness as she thought of William, whom she'd left alone with Sophie at that inn. Above her, the slap of shutters. A window opening. "Elizabeth? Is that you?" a familiar male voice called. She forgot about the rabbit, her morbid fancies, for all she saw was Victor. Her heart gave a lurch. Even in the dark on a rainy night, 5 years since she'd last seen him, she easily recognized him. Victor leaned out the top window of a 4-storied building, one that bore dormers and a roof steeply pitched in the German manner. "Come inside," he hissed. "Hurry!" She rushed toward the door, which swung open at her touch. She rushed up the winding wood staircase toward the attic, taking the steps 2 by 2. An unpleasant odor seemed imbued in the building's very timbers, something sour and foul. It must be the rain. It's probably been storming here for days. The higher she climbed, the stronger the stench. She cupped her hands over her nose to avoid gagging. "There you are!" Victor cried once she'd reached a long wood-panelled gallery she assumed led to his rooms. "My dearest Elizabeth, I can't believe you're here! How happy I am!" His face was illuminated by a solitary candle set on a small table in the gallery. His countenance reminded her of Dr. Galvani's from that winter soiree years ago. Before Elizabeth could offer a word of greeting, Victor wrapped her in an embrace so tight that she struggled to inhale. "It's a sign of his affection, nothing more." She took in Victor's features, marking how he'd changed. His hair was the same mass of dark curls, his eyes just as soulful, though he did look shockingly thin. "He's the same," she reassured herself. "We'll be as we were." "Closer, beloved," he murmured in a voice rough with desire. "It's been too long." Elizabeth didn't resist when he tilted her chin up toward him. He kissed her as he had the night before his departure for Ingolstadt. Mouth against mouth, flesh against flesh. She recoiled. His tongue felt clammy against her lips. He tasted cold, foul, like he'd been ill. She recalled how Henry had tasted of wine, warmth, love. Traitor. A blind panic wrapped around her throat, her chest. She forced herself not to push Victor away. He must have sensed her disgust, for he clutched her at arm's length. His eyes searched her face. "What have you done?" "Somehow he knows about Henry." Her anxiety rose. "Done? I don't understand." His hands tightened like claws about her shoulders. "Then where's Elizabeth? Did you force her to leave?" "I'm here, Victor. It's me. I'm Elizabeth." "Don't lie. You're not Elizabeth. You're my mother. Well, had been my mother." He flicked at the folds of Elizabeth's cloak, brushing something away she couldn't see. "Go! Back to the grave, now!" "Victor!" The gallery suddenly filled with light as a door opened. Someone behind Victor clutching an oil lamp. Elizabeth made out Henry. He set down the oil lamp beside the candle in a fluid motion. He'd arrived before her despite the weather. Her heart leapt at the sight of his dear face. Before anything could be said, Victor collapsed into Henry's arms, still muttering about graves and his mother. Henry's eyes widened with an aspect of shock. "You should leave, Beata." "I can't." "Not yet." Elizabeth grabbed the oil lamp and followed them into Victor's rooms, which turned out to be a solitary chamber. It bore an even stronger stench than the hall. Inside, she made out a long table covered in some sort of refuse, an array of what appeared to be scientific implements, piles of notebooks. She had scant chance to look before the oil lamp guttered. All that remained was the dim blue of moonlight from the skylight. Once her eyes adjusted, Elizabeth watched Henry drag Victor to a long cot draped with blankets and pillows. He forced a glass of fluid into Victor's mouth, some of which dribbled down his unshaven chin. "What's wrong with him? Henry, tell me." "Please go," Henry said again, his voice pitched strangely high. "Victor wouldn't want you to see him this way." "But I'm to be his wife." "All the more reason for you not to be here, please. What's happened?" Victor roiled against the cot like a storm, the whites of his eyes flashing. "He's gone mad." Henry wrestled with him, tying Victor to the cot with lashes of fabric. Victor struggled at first, but abruptly collapsed into what appeared to be a drugged sleep. Henry let out a long breath and looked up from the cot. Elizabeth couldn't make out his expression. Was it sorrow? Desire? Fear? "I didn't expect you to come here," he said after a long moment. "Nor did I. I was worried about him." "And for good reason," Henry finished. "I haven't time now to explain his illness. It's best you leave in case he becomes agitated again. Sometimes the chloral isn't enough." "I want to nurse him." "It's better you not. Go, Elizabeth. Tell me what's going on, Henry, please." "In the morning. I'll come to you, I promise. I assume you're at the coaching inn?" "Yes." All of a sudden, Victor let out a yelp and began to thrash again. Elizabeth fled. As she rushed through the streets of Ingolstadt, she again sensed someone, or something, following her. Henry didn't go to Elizabeth the following morning. Instead, he wrote a letter as soon as the sun rose. He'd barely slept, thinking of her distress at Victor's condition. "Dear Elizabeth, I cannot imagine the shock you must have felt after encountering Victor last night. I apologize that I won't be coming to you this morning as promised. But once you read this letter, you will understand why I'm loath to leave him. I must reiterate my belief that it's best you do not see him. Yes, Victor is ill, far more ill than either of us imagined. But let me assure he will improve, though it may take months, far too long for you to remain in Ingolstadt. Perhaps it is best I start by describing Victor's situation exactly, so you may understand his circumstances. When I arrived in Ingolstadt 2 days ago, I found Victor waiting outside the coaching inn despite the downpour. At first, all seemed well. Once we took shelter, he gave me a warm embrace that soothed my fears. When he pressed as to the reason for my arrival, I did not confess of our concern for him. I only said in a teasing manner, my father's affection for me has overcome his dislike of learning. At last he has permitted me to undertake a voyage to the land of knowledge. But Victor did not understand my jest until I explained I'd travelled to Ingolstadt to study with him. It was then I noticed his eyes were glazed with a feverish glint. He'd grown thin and pale. I found myself unable to remain silent on his demeanour. "How very ill you appear. You look as if you've been awake for several nights." At this statement, any appearance of normalcy dropped from Victor. He trembled like an aged man with palsy. His flesh grew even more blanched of colour. He said at great length, "As you can see, I have been busy and haven't allowed myself sufficient rest. I sincerely hope that all these employments are now at an end." I did not inquire as to those employments, for I was too disturbed to find him thus. I suggested we return to his abode. By then the rain had slowed to a drizzle. He agreed, though he was hesitant. When we arrived at his rooms, he rushed upstairs, leaving me tarrying at his threshold. Some moments later, he reappeared. He clapped his hands like a child. "Now you can enter. Ah, Clerval, dearest of friends, how happy I am." As we ascended the stairs to his chambers, the odour was such that I suspected they were set above a butcher shop. The stench lessened once Victor opened the windows in his rooms. He brought out a simple repast for us of bread, cheese, and coffee. I hoped the food would calm him. Alas, his agitation grew. He jumped over chairs, clapped his hands. His laughter became wilder, louder. I begged, "Victor, what for God's sake is the matter?" "Do not ask me." He set his hands over my eyes. "He can tell. Oh, save me, save me." I pushed his hands away, but as I did so, he struggled and fell in a fit. He did not recover his senses for hours. Fortunately, his landlady was able to recommend a physician who diagnosed him with a brain fever as a result of overwork, malnourishment, and insomnia. The physician stated this affliction was more common than one would wish among students of Victor's ambition. It's unclear what precipitated his collapse. I investigated whether an event had distressed him, perhaps a professor he'd displeased or a student bearing a grudge. Both of his professors, Messieurs Waldmann and Kremp, assured they held Victor in the greatest esteem. I assure you he has outstripped us all. A youngster who but a few years ago believed in alchemy and Cornelius Agrippa as gospel has now set himself at the head of the university. As for his fellow students, though few have witnessed him in class of late, they bear only goodwill. To facilitate his recovery, Victor is to rest and avoid any stimulation. Another reason it is best you do not visit him. A physician will attend him regularly. When he stirs, I've been advised to feed him bone broth and milk bread. As alarming as all this may be, I've been assured he will recover to return to your side in time. Though this is all I need to relate of Victor, I must address another troubling subject, something I bear all responsibility for. Indeed, it would be remiss of me to send you this letter without mention of our final night together in Lake Como. Elizabeth, I won't write of what happened, for you know. If it offers any consolation, the fault was all mine. My behavior was predicated by something I've been loath to confess, lest it cause you pain. But now you know the truth. I love you. Henry jerked his pen away. He reread the last paragraph, those 3 traitorous words. I love you. Overcome, he set down his pen. Anyway, he'd already told Elizabeth he loved her that night in Lake Como. She hadn't responded then. Why did he think she'd respond now? She was fated to be with Victor. I love you, he read again. It was clear she loved Victor, not him. That's why she came all the way to Ingolstadt, rushing to Victor in the middle of the night. Still, Henry's heart was stubborn. When he'd first seen her at Victor's door, he'd yearned to press his suit again, like a desperate fool. Disloyalty and opportunity, that's what I'm made of. Henry glanced at the cot in the corner of the attic, where Victor slept, too drugged to recall Elizabeth's visit. How would Elizabeth react when she read this? Worse, what if Victor were to somehow happen upon his letter at a later date? Or someone else? It made little sense, but Henry sensed someone spying on him. The night of his arrival, Henry had awakened to find the shadowy silhouette of the tallest man he'd ever witnessed standing at the foot of his bed. By the time he grabbed a fire poker for protection, the creature was gone. Henry told himself he'd imagined him. His foreboding only increased when he discovered 2 leather trunks in Victor's possession, containing what appeared to be surgical instruments and anatomical samples. Bones, rotting flesh, and organs. He disposed of the body parts as respectfully as possible and aired out the rooms until they were tolerable. You're a fool, Henry Clerval, he muttered. He should rewrite the letter, destroy the first one. But before he began anew, he needed to mourn for a moment. He and Elizabeth would never be. Could never be. Outside Victor's attic, the clock tower beyond the university walls clanged 6 of the morning. A cart rumbled by. A street vendor shouted. Victor stirred at the sounds, his lips parting like a child's. Henry remembered the bone broth, the doctor's orders. He should hurry. He began a new letter, copying what he'd written until he reached the paragraph where he'd penned those 3 disloyal words. He composed a new ending, innocent of any betrayal. Now that I have completed my account, I hope you understand why you must leave Ingolstadt immediately. It truly is for the best for Victor as well as yourself. Let me assure he bears no memory of your visit, save as a dream. He ranted such to me. I believe it best to allow him to believe this. He'd be humiliated to learn you'd witnessed him in such a weakened state. However, if you or any of your family were to mail a simple correspondence, I will read it to him when he is less volatile. In the meantime, I promise to remain by his side. Your most loyal servant, Henry Clerval. Chapter 8. Justine has returned to us, and I assure you I love her tenderly. She is very clever and gentle and extremely pretty. As I mentioned before, her mien and her expressions continually remind me of my dear aunt. Once Elizabeth received Henry's letter that morning, she departed Ingolstadt with Sophie and William, though their cloaks still bore dust from their travels. However, instead of returning to Lake Como, she insisted they head home for Geneva. Though Elizabeth had no idea what troubles they'd find in Geneva, she couldn't bear to return to the Villa Lavenza after learning of Victor's illness. Every corner offered evidence of her disloyalty to him and the Frankensteins. The dining room, where she and Henry had spent so many evenings conversing over meals. Her bedroom, where they'd lain together and he'd confessed his love. The desk, where she'd drawn that disturbing picture of Victor, which she later burned. Most of all, the apple orchard, where she'd recalled how Caroline had saved her from a life of abuse. Their journey back to Geneva was hindered by interruptions, which did little to relieve Elizabeth's anxiety. Though the weather wasn't as extreme as when they'd travelled to Ingolstadt, snow had arrived early in the Alps, making several mountain passings insurmountable. They ended up dallying extra weeks in small inns tucked in tiny villages. The first delay occurred in the town of Lugano, where she purchased a watercolour kit and brushes. Somehow the act of making art reoriented Elizabeth to who she'd been before Caroline's death. Not the Elizabeth who sketched dead animals, body parts, and monsters, but the Elizabeth who loved beauty and the act of preserving it on paper, an Elizabeth less filled with guilt and sorrow. Save for a portrait she created of William to send Victor, she spent hours painting botanical studies, sometimes without pausing for meals. Sophie expressed concern at Elizabeth's preoccupation, but did not press. Perhaps the maid was still alarmed by Elizabeth's strange behavior after Henry's departure. By the time Elizabeth, Sophie, and William returned to Geneva, it was just after Christmas. The city republic resembled a ruined woman staggering beneath the weight of her fate, which contributed to Elizabeth's apprehension. She was especially disturbed to find the formerly bustling Place du Bourg de Fort inhabited by boarded-up shops and broken windows. Monsieur Clerval's shop appeared abandoned. Elizabeth hadn't been able to resist asking their carriage to take that route. Each street corner hosted hawkers offering pamphlets, some salacious and others thirsting for the blood of the French king and queen who remained in captivity in Paris. Abandoned pamphlets were found frozen in puddles of ice. South of the city gates, someone had set up a tree of liberty in Plain Palais, where bonfires burned at odd hours. Ash hung on the wind, coating ironwork about the city republic in a fine grey powder impossible to avoid. Elizabeth, William, and Sophie arrived home to discover Alphonse in a state of distress. He explained, 3,000 auxiliary troops were withdrawn from Geneva. Therefore we had no protection when the French invaded us. Can you believe it? The French had encouraged rebellion in Geneva. As a result, the Geneva Council staged their own revolution to avoid being forced into the French Republic. Many aristocrats fled for sanctuary in Switzerland and beyond, but not Alphonse, who remained in their cream-bricked manor house on the Rue de Grange. Alphonse warned Elizabeth that he feared a bloodbath resembling the September massacres in Paris, though Geneva did not have a guillotine. Ernest appeared agitated by the news. Elizabeth could not tell where his sympathies lay. Strangely, neither Alphonse nor Ernest spoke of Victor's illness once she'd confided all she'd seen in Ingolstadt. Or if they did, it wasn't in Elizabeth's presence. She told herself they feared upsetting her. She was relieved they said nothing. She still couldn't reconcile the madman she'd encountered in Ingolstadt with the beloved friend she'd grown up with. However, a surprise awaited Elizabeth at home. When she arrived upstairs with her luggage, she discovered Justine making William's bed. Elizabeth questioned her senses before a wild joy bloomed. "Justine, it really is you!" Elizabeth enveloped the girl in an embrace before holding her out to examine her. How different Justine appeared. But then, it had been 5 years since they'd last met. When they'd parted after Caroline's death, Justine was still full-cheeked, awkward of aspect with spotted skin. Now she was a woman, though still petite. She was more lithe than Elizabeth recalled, her face incandescent with a peculiar beauty now that her complexion had cleared. Despite her hunchback, her pale eyes and hair made her resemble a princess from those French fairy tales Caroline loved, rather than a fey creature of the woods. Yet there was something sorrowful about Justine, as though she was haunted by loss. Elizabeth understood this too well. "I did not expect you back so soon," Justine answered, lisping like Caroline in her old way. "Monsieur Frankenstein said you'd return in the spring. He intended me to mind William. In the meantime, I've been aiding cook in the kitchen." Elizabeth asked, "What of your mother? She is well?" 2 rosy spots appeared in the center of Justine's cheeks. "My mother has passed. My brothers and sister also gone. They abandoned Geneva?" Justine's brow puckered. "Dead. Cholera. I did not know until after I returned home. Forgive me for not writing you, mademoiselle, but my responsibilities were heavy." All the Moritzes dead. Ah, that explained the haunted quality Elizabeth noticed in Justine. She offered the maid another full embrace. "We shall be your family now." William burst in, and Elizabeth gathered the boy into her arms. "This is Justine," she said, her tone bright. "She's going to be a good friend to you, Dormouse. You don't remember her, but she attended you when you were a baby." By the time Elizabeth left them, Justine was clapping hands with William in a game, the 2 laughing as though they'd known one another for years. Despite the joy of Justine's return, Elizabeth found dinner that night to be a solemn affair. How could it not be, with fires burning in the squares, raised voices in the street, the lack of flour, the spoiled fruit, the turned meats? However, she chatted to her uncle as though nothing had changed the weeks they'd been away, in an attempt to distract him as well as herself, to push away the disturbances of Ingolstadt and Lake Como. And in some ways nothing had changed. The Frankensteins still ate off gilded plates and drank from Venetian glass. Ernest was nowhere to be seen. Elizabeth didn't dare ask where he'd gone. "Uncle, you are too good," Elizabeth exclaimed as soon as dinner began. "I don't feel very good now," Alphonse replied, his brow furrowed. "You should have stayed in Italy. You look thin, my angel, frail." "I'm fine," Elizabeth evaded. "And I'm even better now that I've seen Justine. I'm so glad you offered her a home." Her return was a sign from Caroline, Elizabeth decided. Hadn't Justine left their household soon after her aunt's death? Hadn't she taken a special interest in Justine, educating her above her station? And now here Justine was, attending to William in Caroline's stead. Alphonse's weary face finally bore a hint of a smile. "How could I not? It took some persuasion to convince her to return. She was fearful I'd asked out of charity. Poor girl, how she's suffered. Shortly after you left for Lake Como, I found her wandering alone in the cemetery by your aunt's tomb. She confided that her mother had died after a long illness, during which she nursed her." "Just as she nursed my aunt?" Elizabeth's eyes filled. Alphonse nodded. "Alas, Justine never received gratitude for her devotion. Madame Moritz blamed her for the death of her siblings, though this made no sense. She took every opportunity to flail the girl." Flail the girl? With this, color drained from Elizabeth's face. Maria, the apple orchard, Caroline. Alphonse set down his wineglass. "Elizabeth, are you well?" "Perfectly." She forced a smile. No need to upset her uncle. "I'm weary, that's all." She excused herself, unable to remain any longer. That night she dreamt of a monster playing hide-and-seek with her and William in the apple orchard. Within this dream, she felt that same foreboding she'd struggled against since Caroline's death. A curse. She shuddered awake with a start, her heart pounding like a drum. It seemed hours before she could sleep again. "I'm safe. We're all safe." By the time Elizabeth rose the next morning, the winter sun was high and the lark had given way to the sparrow. She felt disoriented from that dream. A headache loomed. Outside her room, she heard Justine playing with William, their laughter rising like a melody. Once Elizabeth dressed, she approached the window. She saw sunlight dancing across William's golden curls as he romped with Justine like puppies in a pile of leaves. A moment later, Ernest joined the game. He appeared cheerful for a change. Elizabeth's heart lightened. Justine had already won over Ernest as well as William. Soon a little girl arrived. Louisa Biron. William liked to call her his favorite wife. William smiled at Louisa's approach, revealing twin dimples on his cheeks. Elizabeth watched the four of them chase each other about the garden. Their jests and giggles drowned out the cries of street hawkers selling pamphlets, the clatter of carriages, the angry shouts beyond their home. But it didn't stop her ruminations. That sense of being cursed. She'd thought her confession to Henry had banished it. She should write Henry regarding Victor. But not yet. I'll paint. That will soothe my mind. She resolved to let her secret sketchbook languish in its locked drawer. Instead, she would continue with those scientific studies of plants she'd begun during their travels from Ingolstadt. She yearned for them to be more than pretty pictures. Sometimes she'd slice the flowers open to reveal the tender organs within, the pistils, stamens, and ovules, the secrets hidden in nature. Victor will improve, she told herself as she mixed lush purples and greens to paint an iris. All will be well. By the time he returned home, she'd love him again like she had as a child. They'd wed. We're fated, she whispered aloud. Elizabeth heard a knock on her door. Justine. She was still wearing her cloak, her cheeks rosy from the cold. How like Caroline she remained, with her hair adorned as Elizabeth's aunt had worn it, her head tilted in tender concern. It really was a comfort. Elizabeth looked up from her watercolour. I thought you were in the garden with William. I was. But Monsieur Ernest informed me of the news from Ingolstadt. Justine opened her arms. Again, Elizabeth sensed that haunted quality in Justine, the otherworldly sense of loss. Justine understood, for she'd suffered too. As they embraced, Elizabeth mourned the shell of a man Victor had become in Ingolstadt. She mourned Henry and the loyalties they must honor. She mourned Caroline, who'd saved her from a life of misfortune. She could never tell anyone what had happened with Maria, but she'd never forget. Anything you need of me, I will do, Justine said. This I promise. Chapter 9. My uncle is not pleased with the idea of a military career in a distant country, but Ernest never had your powers of application. I fear that he will become an idler unless we yield the point and permit him to enter on the profession which he has selected. Victor remained in Ingolstadt with Henry for over a year, while the world tipped further into chaos. By the spring of 1794, a new constitution of Geneva had been formed, and the French king and queen relieved of their heads by guillotine. To avoid reprisal, no one wore black. Elizabeth feared yet another revolution in Geneva and suggested they return to Bellerive. Alphonse assured her otherwise, though he sometimes appeared unwell from stress. Elizabeth tried to reconcile herself to her upcoming marriage. It was difficult to forget the Victor she'd encountered in Ingolstadt. My dearest Victor, you have been very ill, she wrote, and even the constant letters of dear, kind Henry are not sufficient to reassure me on your account. Get well and return to us. She wrote him of Ernest and of local gossip, of his father and William, as though all was as it had been. There were the Mansfield sisters, who were desperate for matrimony. The awkward one had become engaged to a rich banker. Louis Manoir, Victor's friend from school, had been engaged and jilted twice because he was discovered gambling in a cafe. Henry kept the Frankensteins apprised of Victor's condition. He wrote, I vow to do all I can to return Victor to you, and am pleased to report it's a matter of weeks before he's hale enough to return to Geneva. This good news did not alleviate the Frankensteins' dread over the troubles in Geneva and France. The servants also sensed this tension, even Justine, whose temperament was usually placid. Elizabeth noticed the maid appeared distracted and slack-cheeked, as though she'd given up sleep to fret. And then one May afternoon, Elizabeth heard a yelp rise from William's room. She rushed to find Justine kneeling before the child, holding a sweet. William wailed, "Justine slapped me, all because I wouldn't eat my lunch." "I'm so sorry, mademoiselle," Justine cried, hiding her face in her hands. "Truly sorry. Is all well?" Elizabeth forced a concerned gaze to cover her confusion. She couldn't imagine Justine hitting a child. Nor could she imagine William lying. He was mischievous, but not dishonest. "You do look tired, Justine." "Forgive me." Justine reached to comfort William. She began to weep herself. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me today." She feels the tension too. We all do. Elizabeth soothed William. "There, Dormouse. What did you do to try our good Justine so? You heard her. She's sorry. No need to cry. Look." Elizabeth pulled from around her neck the locket bearing Caroline's portrait. "Your mamma wouldn't want you to cry so, darling. Here, do you want to hold this?" He did want to hold the locket, but not before he also took the sweet from Justine. "I'm sorry," Justine said again, wiping her eyes. "I don't understand what possessed me." Elizabeth couldn't think how to respond. For a moment she thought anew of Maria. Justine is nothing like her. "I've been working you too hard," Elizabeth said at last, her voice catching. "It is I who should apologize." She couldn't have slapped him before. I'd have noticed. Justine had always been so tender with the boy. Elizabeth pushed her concerns away when Ernest appeared drunk at dinner, earning a scolding from his father. Honestly, in some ways Ernest was more juvenile than William. At least William had the excuse of being a child. "Why won't you let me go to Switzerland or France?" Ernest whined over his untouched plate of food. "I'm old enough, father." Alphonse replied sharply, "You're only 17. Your lungs are not as strong as you think. The doctors warned against exerting yourself. We'd hoped to have you home for another 3 years before university, not join the military. Anyway, this isn't the time to be in France." Alphonse's voice trailed off in pointed omission. Elizabeth understood. Ever since the French had beheaded Marie Antoinette and King Louis, everyone was fair play. Months later, Elizabeth could still envision the descriptions she'd read of women passing their nursing babies to strangers as they marched to the guillotine, men with their collars folded to reveal the tender flesh of their necks. "I'll be safe," Ernest retorted. "Please, father." Alphonse offered a stern gaze. "I want all my family to remain together." Their argument was interrupted by William, who ran into the dining room. He settled below the table, arms and legs flailing. Ernest used the disruption to storm out of the room, slamming the door behind him. William demanded, "Play with me, Lisbeth." Elizabeth soothed, "Not now, Dormouse. We're still dining." "No!" William beat his feet against her chair legs. "Where's Justine?" Alphonse said, frowning. "Shouldn't she be with him?" "No, Papa. I want Lisbeth, not her." William began to wail, causing Alphonse to throw down his napkin. "Calm him," he ordered. Just as Elizabeth again offered William her locket to distract him from a tantrum, Justine swept into the dining room. "I'll take him, mademoiselle." "Leave me alone, Justine," William sobbed, reaching for Elizabeth anew. "I don't like you anymore." "My apologies," Justine said, curtsying to Alphonse. "He didn't sleep well last night, monsieur. He's overtired." Elizabeth laughed nervously as William hugged her knees. Justine looked away, biting her lip. How strangely everyone is behaving today. Elizabeth said, "I'll take him, Justine. You may go." But Justine lingered even after Alphonse left the room. "If I may ask a favor." Her tone was uneasy, Elizabeth thought. "I received a letter. My aunt in Shen. She's poorly. May I visit her tonight?" Well, that explained Justine's peculiar behavior. Still, she shouldn't have lost her temper with William. "But it's so late to be walking that way," Elizabeth responded, rubbing her temples. Shen was nearly a league south of Geneva and French territory. "I didn't know you had other family." "I haven't seen my aunt in years, but..." What about soldiers along the road? I doubt they'll bother me. Please, I'll be back by nightfall. Go ahead, Elizabeth said, just as Ernest returned, ignoring Justine as she rushed from the room. Elizabeth, Father wants to stroll to Plan Palais to take the air, Ernest said. Will you and William accompany us? Please. I need to talk to you. Elizabeth had planned to return to her room to paint, but there was something odd about Ernest's request, something that bothered her beyond his argument with his father. Very well, she said, seeking her gloves. Come, Dormouse. We're going for a walk. It's a fine evening. Plan Palais that evening was luscious and green with spring warmth, soft breezes, and the lazy buzzing of insects, a perfect May evening. Ernest or no, Elizabeth was glad they'd come. Perhaps she'd been spending too much time alone painting. William immediately jumped up and down with a shout of pleasure. What is it you wanted to tell me? Elizabeth asked Ernest once they'd settled on a wood bench beneath an ancient chestnut tree. You're acting very odd. I'll tell you once we're alone, he answered, avoiding her gaze. William, where's Papa? The boy pointed toward an oak some yards away. Over there, with Monsieur Lénard. Monsieur Lénard was a lawyer as well as an old friend of the Frankensteins. Alphonse appreciated his sanguine intelligence. Go visit him. I'm sure he misses you. I want to stay here with you and Lisbeth. But Papa needs you, Dormouse. But I need you. The boy stuck out his lower lip, looking so akin to Caroline when she was in a contemplative mood that Elizabeth couldn't resist a smile. She noticed the locket dangling from his pocket. Let me have it, Dormouse. She should have taken it back earlier. William darted away, laughing. Come get me. Well, at least set it around your neck so you don't lose it, she said. Ah, what a demon you are. Ernest rose from the bench to tickle his younger brother. I'll catch you, you'll see. No, you won't. William dashed across the expanse of lush grass. I'm faster than you. You're old, Ernest. Stupid, too. Elizabeth laughed as the two ran about the oak, Ernest one way, then William the other. Her disturbances of the day faded. Justine's loss of temper was of the moment. She hadn't meant to slap William. She was fretful. They all were. The times were challenging. Once William rushed away, Ernest returned to the bench. I'll give him a minute to hide himself, he explained to Elizabeth. We have our routine. Don't look so worried. He knows the park well. He's a good boy. Elizabeth glanced over her shoulder. William dashed toward the river, which was a thin stream snaking along the edge of Plan Palais. I don't want to leave him unattended for long. Is there enough time to speak? I'll be quick. He leaned in, his tone desperate. I need funds to go to France. My father refuses. Elizabeth drew back, forgetting William. France? I thought that was settled at dinner. Elizabeth, I can't stay here. I can't give you funds. Your father would be furious, she said, rising to her feet. Where's William? I don't want him playing near water. He's over there, behind the oak. He's fine. Calm down. How can I be calm about you leaving home? You're more reasonable than Father, so I'd hoped you'd take my part. You're in trouble, aren't you? She'd heard rumours of Ernest partaking in cards at taverns. He looked old for his age. It would be easy for him to persuade someone to allow him entry. Gambling? No. Ernest flushed. Well, not that sort of gambling. Across the field she heard William laugh. Come on, Ernest. I'm waiting for you. A woman? Elizabeth had never noticed Ernest pay anyone mind, but he was barely 17, too young to be courting. He nodded after a moment. But don't tell my father. Ernest, you're going to lose the game. William sounded further away. The burble of the stream chattered alongside his high voice, birdsong rising as twilight approached. How idyllic it all was, save for Ernest and his troubles. Elizabeth's impatience rose. Ernest was being so evasive. Why wouldn't he just tell her already? I'll be there soon, Dormouse, Ernest called out. Another minute. What happened? Elizabeth asked. "I won't tell Uncle." She glanced William's way. Where had he gone? She recalled him near the trees. Not the river. Well, as long as she could hear him. "I'd rather not say, Elizabeth." An embarrassed smile. "Frankly, it's more irritating than anything. You must trust it's for the best I go away. Not for long. Only a year or two." "A year or two?" Elizabeth turned cold. "This is about the revolution, isn't it?" Ernest scowled. "You have such little faith in me. Oh, I always ruin things. Isn't that what Father would say?" "He does his best. Be kind. He hasn't been himself since your mother passed." Elizabeth choked back a pang of yearning. Caroline would have known how to handle Ernest, just as she'd known how to handle Victor and Alphonse. Ernest's face crumbled. "I wish I'd never come home. Wish I'd stayed in the Alps. I had more liberty as an invalid than I do here." He rose abruptly, smoothing his trousers. "We should go." "Ernest, listen to reason." "I am being reasonable. And now I understand I was unreasonable to reason with you." He glared into the distance. "I'll get William. He's probably ready to leave. Anyway, the sky is clouding over. It'll be dark soon. I'll meet you back here." Ernest strode off toward the river. Elizabeth sat on the bench, her chin tucked in her palms. The sky dimmed into twilight. Once she heard the sparrows quiet, she rose to her feet, exhausted and hungry. Had she eaten lunch? She recalled Justine bringing her morning tea, but dinner hadn't appealed. She'd barely eaten. In the distance, a growl of thunder, a shard of lightning. Alphonse approached, his hat in his hand. He was smiling for once. "Ah, there you are, my angel," he said. "Sorry I took so long. I had an interesting conversation with Léonard." His brow knit. "Where's Ernest and William?" "Ernest went to fetch William. They'll be back presently." Elizabeth set her hand on her uncle's arm, determined not to reveal her distress over Ernest's confession. "Tell me about your conversation. I could use some gossip." "No gossip, alas. News that I wish was gossip." Alphonse launched into a detailed description of the new revolutionary tribunal, which Monsieur Léonard believed had been instigated by the French government. "I told Léonard this cannot be, but perhaps he knows something I don't." Elizabeth grew dizzy, lightheaded. She'd eat when she returned home. She sank onto the bench beside her uncle. The rush of the river had never sounded so loud. "Sorry, Uncle, you were saying?" He patted Elizabeth's hand. "Never mind. We should leave." Another lash of lightning. It appeared a league to the south in the direction of Shen. She recalled Justine's mysterious errand. She must be back by now. No need to worry. "Ah, there's Ernest," Alphonse announced. "Without William." "He's probably run off again. I should have insisted he stay near." Hopefully he hadn't lost the locket of Caroline. Ernest approached, his face moist with sweat, clutching William's Spencer jacket. "Did you see William? I can't find him anywhere. I swear I've run the length of the field 4 times. Elizabeth asked, "Are you sure he didn't go toward the stream?" "He's a good boy," Ernest assured. Alphonse rose as well from the bench, clutching his walking stick. "We'll find him. He couldn't have gone far." He narrowed his gaze toward the sky, where the sun had dropped behind the mountains. "We should hurry before it's dark." Elizabeth's skin prickled, cheeks flushed. Fear, that's what she felt. Her eyes strained in the gloom. In a field beyond, she made out the lurching silhouette of a tall man. A giant. Her heart gave a stutter of panic. She squinted. Nothing there. She'd imagined him, just as she had that rainy night in Ingolstadt. As for William, surely he must be near. She turned around Plain-Palais, heart pounding. Where can my boy be? Chapter 10. I must say also a few words to you, my dear cousin, of little darling William. I wish you could see him. He is very tall of his age, with sweet laughing blue eyes, dark eyelashes, and curling hair. When he smiles, 2 little dimples appear on each cheek, which are rosy with health. William hadn't intended to end up so far afield from Plainpalais. Initially, his wandering had been a way to garner attention, for he was riled by Justine slapping him earlier. He was shocked Elizabeth hadn't scolded Justine. She really should have. After all, he was a Frankenstein. As much as he loved Justine, she was only a servant, like Sophie. "Come find me," he'd shouted in the direction where the oak with the bench lay, though he could no longer see it. "I'm here!" But where was here? He couldn't recall. "Come get me, then." Silence. The boys circled about. To his right was the stream, the one where Ernest had taken him fishing earlier that spring. It burbled over rocks and reeds, high for the season, for it had been a rainy spring. Behind him was the woods, which led back into the heart of Plainpalais. William pulled his Spencer coat off. He'd grown hot from running. Elizabeth and Ernest were still beneath the oak, no doubt still fighting. And it was a fight he heard. Though William would soon be 6, he'd spent enough time with adults to recognize when conversations turned nasty. This granted him an advantage among his friends, the few he had. Girls he liked. Wives, he called them, mainly because it pleased Elizabeth. Elizabeth always seemed so sad, even when she was smiling. Though he was only 5, William understood smiles often hid any number of sorrows. How could she not be sorrowful, with Victor ill and far away? He held no memories of his eldest brother, but knew him from Elizabeth's stories. She'd marry him one day, but William's adoration of Victor bore no comparison to his worship of Mamma. She watched over him from heaven. The stories Justine told left him with no doubt. Thinking of this, William's short fingers closed around the locket with the picture of Mamma. When he'd removed his coat, he was careful to hang the necklace around his neck to avoid losing it. By then, dusk had fallen, hushing the birds into a stupor. The setting sun glimmered purple and blue over the mountain rim. Alone. William was alone in the night. This had never happened before. He would be brave, like the soldiers Ernest spoke of. Where was he? "Walk toward the river," he whimpered. That would take him home, wouldn't it? Sooner or later, a river led to Geneva. Geneva was founded on 2 rivers, the Rhone and the Arno. William was nothing if not smart. Wasn't that what Justine always said? William walked for some moments in sturdy determination, his short legs tiring as he scrambled over rocks and roots. At last, he came to a clearing. The field he found himself in was boring. Flat, tall grass, flies, gnats. Surely the river was beyond this. Surely Geneva was near. His fist tightened again around the precious locket of Mamma. He'd be scolded for running off, but at least he hadn't lost it. His stomach was growling, and he was thirsty. When he got home, Justine would make him warm milk, as she always did before bed. He'd wrap his arms around her, forgive her. After all, she was a servant, and he was a Frankenstein. His papa was a syndic. He could grant her mercy. Some feet away, he saw a cluster of ravens rush into the sky. Below their rising wings stood a man with hair the color of coal, his lurching form silhouetted by the dying rays of the day. The man was taller than William imagined possible, with a sallow face seamed by scars, long arms bound by muscles and torn clothes. He appeared a giant from one of his storybooks, a creature, a demon, a monster. The monster turned to meet William's gaze. His thin, dark lips spread into a grin.